Welcome to Regen Chat. I am Liz Jennifer.
And I'm Nick Remison.
We haven't been about for a few months, 6 months, in fact. We had a last of podcasts around our last conference, which was in June of last year, and then we've been a bit quiet. We've had some time to reflect. Um, Obviously, we've been amazing somewhere else, Nick, haven't we? You can't believe 6 months has flown by since we last did
I
one of
don't think
these.
it is 6 months, Liz. I think it's more like 4 or 5. Well, we did the conference and it was great, and then we kind of, um, had to think about what we were gonna do, and we maybe were gonna do things differently. And after a lot of chitter-chatter and chewing things over, we come up with "Be the change." So, do you explain "Be the change"?
So, as Nick said, it was a response to how we felt after the conference, which is slightly burnt out, but that's standard for the conference. But also the feeling that we were talking about stuff a lot, not necessarily demonstrating it. And also there's this idea that we're incredibly grateful to Tim and Emma, but we'd been on that farm for a couple of years, and this feeling that farmers wanted to go and see different farms. So that idea of we wanted it to be a bit of a roving roadshow and more demonstration rather than just talking about stuff. And so that's where that idea emerged from. So we put out applications really sort of end of the summer, and then we appointed three farmers, which we'll talk about in a minute. And they started sort of beginning of October, and then we've been to see them all. And so the last few months has been a flurry of activity around those farms, really. And we're now getting to the point we're quite ready to talk about it because we've actually started to do things and work out what we're planning to do on each of those farms. The key part of this is because it's Esmée Fairbairn Foundation funded, lots of F's in that. A lot of it was to thinking about how to do things differently. Um, so part of this whole thing is about co-creations. It's not about us going onto farm and telling them what to do. It is about us coming up and working together with these farmers. So each of those farms have a very specific sort of idea and plan. Um, and you'll hear this podcast is from Sarah Bell, who's one of the farms, and you can hear some of the things we're up to with her. And then we'll also have the other farmers. So we've got Alan, and we've also got Liz and Rob Hargreaves as the other two farmers. And in time, they'll be on a podcast too. So we'll hear about what they're up to. Um, it is it's a combination of exciting. There's a lot of work involved or thinking, but for me, it's about demonstrating a whole range of ways that we can work with farmers.
But what I really loved was, and I'm loving your roving roadshow, Liz, especially when I can't really pronounce my R's. But when we had a load of people apply, and then we interviewed 6 or 7. And one of our strap lines was, it was for people who don't quite know they need to do something differently, but they don't quite know what that is. So with 6 or 7 of them, we had quite in detail calls, and it was just really interesting and quite a privilege for people to really open up and talk about not only their farms, but the layers of their business. So their family, their kind of thoughts for the future, problems they had. And I found that really interesting. And so think we picked 3 that are geographically, is that right, the word? In different locations, different types of farms, and also different things to tackle or talk about and discuss and chew over on each farm. So yeah, it's been quite a challenge to whittle it down to 3, but I think it'll be good.
And we've also got to highlight that we're also being coached. So
Mm.
we've worked with someone called Janine, and that was really interesting because that helped us come up with a very different way of sort of advertising and interviewing them. So we put a pack together, and it was like my favorite job. But anyway, so we put a pack together, and sort of the creativity started from right at the beginning of that interview process. And then we're having semi-regular sessions with a guy called Paul Jeffries, who I met on a course, standard. Um, and he's just really useful because he helps both of us reflect on how we also have to be different. So if we
Mm.
want a different outcome, we also have to turn up and be slightly different. So that's in itself is delightfully challenging.
we've spoken to Sarah, haven't we, in this pod, and she's doing amazing things, and I think she was really open with us, and she shared a lot about her thoughts for the future and her love of trees.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that the site we're doing more of the work on is a relatively new site to her. And as she sort of talks about, which is she's made quite a lot of changes on the other sites she's worked or owns or farms, but it's how she wants to change this farm quicker. So how can she apply what she's learned and make the changes quicker? And and we chose her in particular because of this mixed farming, so a bit more arable. So we have done some meetings in places with mixed farmers. So it's sort of also a conscious step away from just beef and sheep. Not that we don't like just beef and sheep, but this also engaging with mixed farms. Yeah, so June, uh, we're having an event at Sarah's in June, Alan's in June, and Liz and Rob's will be in July. Those dates will be out imminently. Also, we forgot to mention the book.
Book list. Well, we are on the eve of going down to Oxford to probably talk about the book a bit more. Um, so yeah, the book, which is your baby, really, Liz. Because as I said to you when we talked about this, I'm a little bit dyslexic and can't really read out loud. So um, it's going to be interesting.
So the book is through kindness, I think, of Jeremy from 5M Books. So he's offered to work with us on developing this almost like a textbook on using Be the Change farmers and our own farms to sort of work through case studies of the range of tools that can be applied to bring transformational change onto farm. It's still in the no, it's past the planning stage. It's in the I now need to just get on and write it stage. But I think it will provide a really useful route in, I suppose, to other people. But also, for me, it's just use. I'm hoping it will be useful and also a way of pulling together all of these different things that we're up to in terms of
Mm.
is it holistic management? Is it information I learned from Create? Is it other sort of nature based stuff? So it's a way of bringing together all the bits that we work on. And the other thing we need to remember is to promote the seminar that's on the 14th of January with Daniel Regenis. And he's going to be talking about soil food webs. That's available to everybody, but talking through the soil web results from the 3 farms for Be the Change. So he'll use them as some case studies, but also talk about what he's up to and also that importance of inoculation, particularly with fungi. So that's the 14th of January, but more information about that will be available shortly.
Evening webinar when it's miserable outside. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, talk through all the results that we've got from the farms.
And the hope is that following that one will be one more on the sort of more detailed soil tests. So we'll do a series of sort of more techie ones, and then one that sort of brings it all together to talk about what the plans are for each of those farms come the spring. But what we also have to remember, Nick, this time a year ago, we didn't have Rona in place. So we've done a lot in a year.
I know, I know. Well, I feel so. I'm. What are we? 5 days after New Year, and I'm still in a little bit of a illness, slight hangover bubble. Feel quite low energy, but Alan, who is so you're kind of looking after Sarah, aren't you?
Yeah.
And Alan is my, we'll say my little chap then, but he's worried when it's a bad thing to say. Alan is the farm who I'm looking after, and then Rona's looking after Liz and Rob. And yeah, no, we're traveling down to Oxford together, Alan and I, and so we're just we're kind of I'm enjoying getting to know him and his business. And I think you'll probably be the same with Sarah, won't you? But Rona has kind of joined the team and has softened us because we both can be quite abrasive sometimes, can't we? So I think she's a calming influence.
It takes a lot. Self talk is not what we're after this early in January. You need some vitamins,
I do. I'm taking a lot of supplements, Liz. I am. I am.
taking and maybe some sunshine.
Yeah, I just maybe need a bit of fake tan or something. Look. rather pale.
Um, what are your other aims for 2026? Have you made your plans yet?
My other aims are to, on a personal level, I've taken to reformer Pilates in quite a big way. So I've got quite a dodgy lower back, and I'm trying to do reformer Pilates a lot in conjunction with weights and running. Far too much information there, but I just love it. Um, I want to try and be a bit more businesslike around selling my eggs, just try and maximize our profit and make it a little bit more streamlined. Um, I want to continue our really good relationship with Westmoreland buying our stall cattle. And then my big push for the year is probably our meeting barn, which is now pretty much done. And I've got to make things happen in there. So we've lucky enough that we've got countryside stewardship school visits. Just they've just come back and said yes to that. So I need to push for school visits, push for meetings, holding events, that kind of thing, really, and just trying to deal with two teenagers and a reno at the same time. But Matt,
Having a midlife crisis about guitars, I hear.
he's bought himself a guitar called a Gibson something. If you're into guitars, you'll know what that is. Oh my God, he loves it. Absolutely loves it. Wishes he'd been a rock star, having a bit of a crisis. And yeah, but as I'm now 50, my big thing is that I need to, I'm kind of well, I'm always quite conscious of health. Saying that, I've had a very, very boozy new year, but I just want to try and be as healthy as I can, which I guess when you get to 50, you have a bit of a crisis, and um, but um, yeah, that's my plan. What about you, Liz?
Uh, I'm similarly health focused. We do sometimes have detailed conversations about the supplementation we take. Mine is all evidence based. I do a quick Google Scholar search before I do engage in my supplementation. Um, I also want to do more strength training, fitness type stuff. Um, but quite a lot of my is based around the farm, so spending more time at the home farm, really trying to work out a clear plan for what we're up to. Now we've got clarity around succession planning and all that stuff, so I'm trying to understand what our generation really wants from the farm. So that's potentially
Mm.
exciting, potentially a lot of debates. Um, and then I've got I for me the big focus is I do quite a lot of cooking, so I want to develop a herb garden that's like kick-ass herb garden, and I'm also learning hardcore barbecuing. So that's my 2 aims on my cooking front.
Really?
Mm.
A kick-ass.
Mainly because I want to be able to I can cook for lots of people involving an oven. I can't barbecues and big scale stuff because you can't regulate the heat. So it's how do you do it on barbecues? And then the hope is that we're developing a woodside area on the farm for events. So then in time is to do sort of outside catering type stuff on barbecues with our own wood, all of that stuff.
The thing is with a barbecue, it's very easy to go wrong, isn't it? I think I've had some really crap barbecues, like charcoal,
Um,
undercooked.
so I think I got a book for Christmas which might be a bit advanced. So but by my aim by the end of the year is I am more confident on cooking over coals stroke charcoal. This is not a gas barbecue situation. This is wood. Yeah.
And with maybe the odd extinguisher, quite handy.
Yeah, near a pond. Be fine.
And are you doing any courses?
No,
Oh,
apart from barbecuing,
a
doing a
barbe
one-day barbecuing course. I've banned myself from courses until I've written this goddamn book because it's just a distraction. I don't need any more ideas. I just need to write them down. Notice there's a lot of I am writing this book and your name's just going on it, but we'll cross that bridge. You're definitely going to be last on the book in small letters.
I don't mind being in small letters. I don't.
And you're not going on the book tour because you can't read out loud.
You might have to take Neris with you, your other, podcasting, and she can just pretend to be me. I'm slightly Welsh and she's, Welsh, so I think she could be me.
Heaven forbid if we get to do an audiobook, just saying. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the Regen Ag Chat. You're the first of the Be the Change farmers to be on this, so welcome. And can you just talk us through your farm?
Yeah, of course. We are a family business based in Rutland. We farm across 3 sites, a mixture of tenanted and owned land. The spectrum of the farm in terms of soil types is quite wide. We've got some bits and bobs of grade 3 soil on some lighter ironstone brash land, and quite a lot of very heavy clay arable soils that are grade 4. Lots of boulder clay, lots of very high mag silt clay in the bottom of the Welland Valley that floods. We sort of live in a world of trying to run a fairly balanced system off land that's not probably the best or the most fertile land. We also have quite an area of grassland that is probably more akin to an upland um, rough grazing than a lowland rough grazing. It's very, very thin soils and very banky bits of gorse. And that really underpins our suckler cows. So we run 112 Limousin cross homebred suckler cows. There's a little bit of British Blue in amongst them. There's a little bit of beef shorthorn amongst them. And the herd's really been bred to sort of balance off productivity, milkiness, and temperament in the cows, but then to create a beef animal that'll go through on the dead and grade well. So at the moment, we are selling a lot of our cattle, our young stock as stores. The best heifers go back into the breeding herd. We also sell a little bit of meat from the farm through our shop, which is a sort of, I always say it's a bit of a 5 villages big enterprise. It's really there to go 5 villages in every direction and engage with people who really value seeing where their meat comes from. And quite a lot of our customers probably wouldn't eat meat if they didn't eat our meat, if that makes sense. So it's all about having an open door and something there for the community, really. We also have 3 accessible luxury holiday cottages. And from a sort of broader diversification perspective, I have spent the last 10 years moonlighting, doing a little bit of supply chain consultancy since I came out of a proper big girl job career in 2016.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your big girl job career?
When I had a big girl job, I worked for one of the biggest cooperatives from a grain perspective in the country. I did a myriad of jobs there, from data and data warehousing through to sustainable supply chain management and farm trading. So the sort of last 12, 18 months of that job was all around managing big brand supply chains in kind of a category management type role, whereby I was managing supply chains for people like Warburtons, Nestle, Muntons, Adnams, and really putting together the sustainability and the technical around the commercial offering of a standard trading desk. So it was really generally giving them that holistic service around the things that sort of sat outside the transactional part of moving grain from A to B and putting together supply chain contracts that went back to farmers. So I've always had a bit of a mindset around how do you put together something that is bigger than the sum of the parts? Because you can move grain through a supply chain transactionally. But actually, when you start to get into the broader piece of sustainability, of brand value, of technical quality, and making that grain perform in a supply chain, there's quite a lot more to it, and how you fit that together to be both practical from a farming perspective, elegant from a perspective of moving those things through the supply chain from a data perspective, and then actually making sure that product technically hits the specification day in, day out at the mill gate to allow the on-bound supply chain to work with. It's really, really interesting. I'm probably a generalist, if I'm honest, in that respect.
Can you just give us an example? So, like you mentioned Warburtons or Nestle. So, what could that mean? Is it spray applications? Is it cultivation type? It's like red tractor plus something? What is the information that's being collected by the farmer, I suppose?
That very much depends on the agreement and what it's trying to achieve. So, I mean, if you go back to 2014, 2015, when I was sort of doing this day to day, that was very much around things like carbon footprint and glyphosate. By today's standards, it was skinny. But if you look at some of the things I've touched more recently, that's more about bespoke contracts that fill the gap between SFI and what any particular brand wants for the market. And there's a real art to putting together how you deliver something that sits in that space that adds value without bogging farmers in having to capture and create, because farmers actually create the data that goes into a supply chain. And I feel quite strongly about the fact that people use data as a security blanket. So in the on-bound supply chain, if people feel like they've got data points, they feel like they're rich in knowledge, understanding, defense, dare I say. But actually, when it comes back to farm level and there is somebody there having to create every little bit of that data, whether it's a spray application, whether it's a drilling date, whether it's the photo of a cover crop post grazing, that's actually all really hard work. So how you approach that in a way that is heavy enough to be credible, but light enough touch to be manageable for a farmer is really interesting. And I feel quite strongly that if people are going to bend farming systems for the benefit of data, they need to understand why they're doing it and what outcome they want, and genuinely how much data they need rather than collecting everything just in case, because that's unsustainable for farming and it's asking farmers to do a lot of work for not much money.
Previously, it's been death by checklist, hasn't it? And that's what's trying to avoid.
Yeah, and I think that is always the risk. And something I see again and again in the food industry around sustainability is people that do jobs for 2 years. So somebody comes into a job fresh, green, potentially with an MA from York or somewhere really posh in sustainability. And they say, oh, well, we need all the data. We need all the data. And farmers must do this because we've read a book and the book says this is good. Therefore, farmers must do this. And by the time you've worked through helping them to understand what they really need and what they're trying to achieve with what they think they need, and whether what they think they need is what they actually need, they then look pretty good to their boss and they get promoted. And you're back to the beginning. And you sort of almost get this hollowing out of wisdom of what supply chains need. So for the farmer, for the merchant, and the people further down the supply chain, you're almost back on the treadmill every 2 years with new people. And that's tough for farmers because it almost inevitably ends up with somebody saying, oh, yeah, but yeah, the system you started with 2 years isn't today's system. You need to use a different data entry system for that. And the merchant who's put in an agreement is then back to square one, thinking, gosh, we've got to start again with putting agreements back into farmers and new systems back in from our perspective. So, how you get that continuity of approach to get a continuity of high quality outcomes is really, really challenging. And that's why you end up with death by data and people just not knowing where they stand. And I think it prevents outcomes from being as good as they could be with these programs, and the quality and the ethos really holding good. And I suppose I did a project with Warburtons and the Country Trust around education and getting school children onto farms, and that was a really simple program. It was really hard to put together, but once it was running, it was really simple. Farmers loved it, schools loved it, Warburtons loved it, children loved it. And 10 years on, it still runs. And that really is the answer is an elegance in putting the hard work in structuring something well and putting it together well, but then a brand really supporting it through the long term and changes of people.
And I suppose, and
Mm.
as you alluded to, the acceleration in what then is defined as region, in the last few years, that must have been particularly challenged because everybody you speak to has a slightly different definition of what that means on farm. And certainly I've had various conversations with people who want it to be defined as practices. It's like it's not as simple as that.
Yeah, and I think there's also an element of what, as a brand, can your money buy? Because what you typically find is people with very big ambitions, some practical, some not so, and quite small pots of money sat behind that. And that money has to flow down through a supply chain. And typically, 30 to 50% of that will land with the farmer. But there's also an awful lot of on-bound admin that also has to get the cost covered somewhere and somehow. Because when you get into sort of looking at a contract that's going to need 100,000 data points collecting off 100 farmers, that starts to get really expensive. And it's really easy as a farmer to say, well, how come only 50% of the money gets to the farmer? This is nonsense. But actually, when you look at the cost of putting in the computer systems needed to move that digital data consistently, reliably, and solidly through a supply chain, that's massively expensive.
Oh, it was bizarre that I happened to pick up a packet of Cat, so the very like the common cat food, and they had a regenerative farming claim on it,
Wow.
which you would never think would be on cat
Mm.
food, but obviously the grain content. But I just thought it was interesting that
But I would probably say to you that I don't know if GoCat's a Mars brand or a Nestle brand, but these are food companies that do pet food. So if you look on the back of that, it will either say Mars or Purina, I imagine, and Purina is owned by Nestle.
so it's all within that wider business. So if they've got regen going into that or regen products going in,
Thought this stuff all comes from the very top of businesses, from their corporate
yeah,
sustainability goals.
Purina.
And yeah, so if it's Purina, so that's Nestle, so that's going to be encased by Nestle's corporate sustainability goals. So yeah, of course it's going to flow back down, whether it's human food, pet food, or something else.
Nick, are you happy with data chat?
Yes, I'm just thinking what you need to be slightly closer to your microphone, Lilibet. I find it really interesting. I find it interesting that you were so into that world, which I think sounds really exciting. And now you're farming and just doing that a little bit. Are you still
I've had about 6 months away from consultancy just because I've had a massive project on the farm at home. But I think uh, my heart sits with farming first, and it always has done right through my career. And my heart sits with the farming community first. And everything that I do in my consultancy work really seeks to bridge gaps
mm,
and to just be a little bit practical and a little bit pragmatic about making things work long term and deliver long term value. And that's value in the rounder sense. That's not just money. Data burdens only being as heavy as they need to be, data governance being good and done in the background. All of that stuff really sort of matters to me. But the thing that sets me on fire is resilient farming systems and how we turn what we do as farmers into something that works from a profitability perspective, from a societal perspective, and from an environmental perspective, and how you put that puzzle together.
yeah, it's that long-term view. Like you say, so many people are in a job for 2 years and then they move on.
Yeah, and we're all here for generations, aren't we? None of us take this as a 2-year operation when you're looking at a farming system. You can't because it just doesn't.
So who are you farming at home with?
So my parents, Robert and Sue, and my husband Ed, and I have 2 children who are in their mid-teens, who are both very um, A, keen, and B, have a very strong view of farming and what farming should be and how it figures in their future as well. And it needs to figure in both of their futures. So I sort of feel it's fairly beholden on me to start planning from a climate perspective how we get resilience into these systems in a world that's not getting any cooler. So my family go back 5 generations on both sides in farming in different ways in this part of the world. Um, my cousin from one side of the family farms next door on one block of land. My cousin from the other side of the family farms next door on another block of land. Um, my husband married in. He's almost a foreigner. He came from Nottinghamshire. So so yeah, my roots here are deep, and I feel like I'm just one person passing through really, but I need to do my bit to make it good for the next people that come behind me.
So, as part of Be the Change, we identified that this idea of functional landscape was really important to you. So, this newish site to you, isn't it? You've been farming it for a year or so and owned it for less than a year. Um, and this idea that it just needed to be more functional from a farming perspective, but also for nature. So, um, we brought Marion Boswell in. We had a session together. How did you find that?
I found that really, really interesting. Ev I do a lot of walks and talks on the farm with people from various different backgrounds, and every time I bring somebody on to the farm from a different background, you always learn something. It's the best thing to walk your farm and see it through somebody else's eyes. It's just an absolute delight. Um, and this site where we farm up above the Ibrook Reservoir. It's quite interesting because it's obviously above a drinking water reservoir. It's next to 100 acres of woodland. It's glacial boulder clay running to almost good ironstone loam soils, but a little bit brashy in places and probably a bit drought prone if we're going to be very honest, but drought prone for Rutland terms, not drought prone sandland in Norfolk terms. So, it's still 50% clay soil. It's sort of it feels like it's been a functional farm and it needs a little bit putting back in terms of landscape connectivity. Um, it doesn't have many trees. The ash diebacks hit it really hard. And it feels like there's a real space for trees. I've watched sheep go through this summer with really very little shade. And that's new to me. That was hard in a hot summer. We've got some priorities around how we make the landscape feel better for people, how we put more fertility back into what are quite challenging soils. And I'm used to a world of 3-day soils, but some of these are 1-day soils. It's from a growing arable crops perspective, it is quite challenging. And how we then sort of knit that together from a habitat perspective. And Marion came at it from a really interesting place of almost looking at it without a lens of agricultural productivity, which is my first lens and is almost her last lens. So I looked the other way down the telescope with Marion. And I'm really interested to see what comes next with this project, because one of the things she was amazing with was some of the things she got out of the children in this conversation and their longer term aims and aspirations and ambitions. I mean, if you talk to me about my aspiration at 15, it probably wouldn't follow to where I am today. But there are some really good themes in there that cross over with things that need doing anyway. So how we sort of feed that seed of interest from the children as we put together what essentially I hope will be a master plan for the farm. So as we can find funding to do bits and bobs, we sort of put a jigsaw together. And I mean, that jigsaw could be a 20, 30-year project. But I'm hoping Marion's input will give us that master plan that we can then start to say, okay, where are our priorities? Where's the funding? And start to fit together something that contributes more broadly, really.
And I think what was, Nick wasn't there, I was with you that day, but I think what was also interesting, this idea, and it came really quickly from Zoe, which was this idea of that of not only did she want to look at a really interesting landscape, but she always also wanted to use it for food. She talks about when she actually went to get sloes, didn't she, and blackberries and all stuff this year. So actually, how can we also think about it in putting in when there is funding and to plant some trees, but how do you think about it from actually like if we talked about it as a food forest, it's not going to be quite like that, but that idea of multifunctional landscape.
Yeah, and I mean, I've, as you know, been sitting with the idea of a market garden and what that looks like over the next 20 or 30 years for me and from my perspective. Um, because one of the things I've been born into a beef, sheep, and arable farming family, but the thing that sort of sets me on fire in growing terms is the instantness of vegetables and fruit and nuts and that horticultural aspect of more around the fresh food than the cereal crops. And as much as I love the sort of intellectual challenge of growing a cereal crop, actually growing vegetables, my goodness, it keeps you humble. I mean, I am absolutely blown away by what people in the fens do day in, day out to produce veg of the quality and quantity that they do. But I think there's something about community and how we use our meat direct sales business and complement that with whole, fresh foods and a really great experience for people in connecting them to food, and how you then move a market garden permaculture experiment somewhere that we've sort of started to move a bit of earth and create some shelter becomes a really, really interesting long-term project for me, which sort of feeds a bit into the succession discussion, I suppose.
But what's exciting though, your kids have got like 80 years plus of seeing that. And
Yeah.
yeah, because most people have this kind of awakening when they're not going to see so much of it that that time length is amazing for them to. watch it follow through.
Yeah, I've been really privileged because my parents and when further back when my dad and my uncle farmed together, planted a lot of trees, and I've lived with the benefit of that. So I always think that you almost have to start 25 years too soon for your kid and appreciating it. So it feels like the right time in that respect.
What were there any other little nuggets of what they thought about?
Um, it was quite interesting. My son's quite I can see Liz laughing. My son's quite focused on the infrastructure of the farm, and Ed and I are both quite strong on actually a big part of efficiency in your farming system is getting the infrastructure of your farm right. So making sure you've got tracks in the right places, making sure you can connect electric fences in the right places to allow arable and grassland systems to work together, making sure you've got water where you need it or you can get water to where you need it so you're not pulling bowsers about. And one of the problems we've got on this farm is just way too many grass tracks. And on a farm that's far too wet for grass tracks, it needs a spine of stone track putting through it. And we've put a spine of it, mains electric fence through it already, because that's very much part of how we can better integrate our livestock into our arable system. And he was very focused on that. And what was the question, Liz?
Think there's too much nature was his response. Too much nature, we're done. Let's just finish. But what's interesting and as Sarah said, Marion was really good at just kept him talking, and what he's really clearly passionate about is spending time like shooting or being out in the countryside with a gang of mates. And so he's it was quite interesting because we he'd like the instant response is, "Oh, you wanna shoot things," but inherently, you want the habitat and the ecosystems to be working, therefore, and that population of birds is healthy enough so you can take some out. So it's an interesting debate to have, and we know, I mean, you're not very far from the Allerton Project and the Game and Wildlife Conservancy Trust. Some of that real jump up in some conservation was driven by people who wanted to shoot things.
Yeah, I'm for him, I think the shooting is very much driven by the outside and the social aspect of it, as opposed to the I need to kill something aspect of it. That's he's as happy beating as he is shooting. So I think for him, it's working out what a connected ecosystem is and helping him to get to the point that he can see those connections working in the context that he wants them to work. Whereas as my daughter's much more about, well, I want to go and pick food. You know, I want to make something, I want to create something, and ultimately she wants something that's saleable. So that sort of feeds much more into the thought process around food forests, productive orchards, permaculture, and that sort of stuff.
And the other thing that Marion did was ask questions about where favourite places were, and everybody there was a slight difference, but there was one place on the farm that everybody really liked. And it was interesting of then talking through why were they your favourite places? And a lot of the time, the view from some of your farm is incredible, isn't it? Down the
Yeah.
Welland Valley and across the reservoir. So some of it is just it's aesthetically amazing to be standing there looking. And then there was one particular field that it was a more of a feeling, wasn't it? Everybody was feeling like that's the place you wanna be on the farm. And so a lot of Marion's work is about how do you picking up on that sort of people connection with the land and how do you then amplify it? So how do you build the connections and make that power then move through the farm, through the connective? So it could be more trees, it could be slightly wilder hedgerows in certain places. Do you mean it's not just endless trees, is it? It's
No.
making it a really thought out plan of how do you get this connectivity running through the farm. The other point is that because you mentioned at the time this idea that you do a lot of walk and talks, but for you there is no natural path through the farm, and it was just a simple idea of that is just to the connection works better because you can go to lots of different places, can't you?
I Yeah, so having reflected on that conversation with Marion, especially around that little sheltered triangular paddock, which is north facing and boggy, but I think the attraction of it is that it's sheltered in a farm that is very exposed. And it's made me really think very hard about how shelter works within the farm. And it's also made me think about as you walk around the farm, where are your breathing spaces? Because that piece about a place to get out of the wind, because it is windy, it's very exposed, it's very high, or a place that you pause with the shelter of trees because the view's amazing, or a place that animals can move in a different way. And I think there's an element in landscape of you need that rhythm of places that are busy, places that are exposed, places that are sheltered, places that are open vistas. You know, open grassland has something really beautiful about it. And how you put that together and curate it on a landscape scale is something that I hadn't really thought very hard about the principles behind until we had that time with Marion. And as I now walk and I look and I think, I'm seeing it through a different lens. And that is just so valuable of being able to look at things from a different aspect.
We love
Mm.
Marion. Um, and yeah, and I think what's interesting is that as a technique, it's not that well known within the productive agriculture space. Like a lot of the people that she works with is people they might have bought land, but generally they're coming from different industries and have just made the money to be able to buy land. So I just think it's fascinating to apply it across.
Yeah. And for me, the art
Productive ag.
of that is going to be in taking almost the principles of garden design and moving them into a farming space, but not in any way compromising the food production capability of the land and the
And I think
ability of nature to
and
move through it.
her point, which is, I spoke to her last week, and was this idea that it's for her, it's all about getting an ecosystem to work, and that involves the people. So it is the animals, it's the people, it's all of that. And so, to your point that about Tommy and all of that, so it's how do you get it to function as this really complex ecosystem, but everybody, do you mean it's additive all the time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
The more you think about it, the more you peel the layers back, really, I think, as well.
What we did forget to mention when we talked about your arable earlier was you are this farm relatively new in the farm we're focusing on for Be the Change, sorry, relatively new farming it, but you have already changed cultivation techniques and you're applying different approaches to the arable bit, aren't you, to try and help with soil
Yeah.
health?
So across the rest of the farm, we moved very little soil. Over the last 20 years, we've moved from a plough, power, harrow based system to we now run a horse avatar behind our cultivation is a low disturbance sumo flat lift leg. We really don't move a lot of soil if unless it's necessary. There's probably fields on the farm that haven't seen any sort of cultivation in terms of a plough going into the ground for over 10 years. But I do use the plough as an agronomic tool. If I've got a brome problem or if I've got a groundsel problem or something that needs burying, I'm not going to indiscriminately keep throwing chemistry at it if I can put the plough in and turn it over. And this sort of comes back to me glibly saying it's farming, not religion. I tend to like to take a step back and look at the choices we're making from a farming perspective and say, I'm not going to be wedded to not using a plough when it's a useful agronomic tool for for managing weeds. But also I think we're starting in some of our soils that really haven't been ploughed for a long time to see some sort of stratification in the soil. And I think we've got bits of acidity in top layers, even though they're being limed. And I'm sort of on and off having the discussion with our agronomist as to whether we're seeing nutrient stratification to some extent as well. And we're definitely seeing some benefits where we are going in with a plough as well. So I, w- I wouldn't say we're wedded to it. We do as much as is necessary and as little as possible in terms of soil. But this farm, having been on a much more cultivated principle for the last 20 years, has sort of really struggled in terms of just going to not moving any soil meaningfully, really. And because you're looking at glacial boulder clay, moving soil is it's hard work on your wearing metal in your tires. We don't want to do it particularly, but the soil's just not ready for it. And we're really having to go back to first principles with working out what we do with these soils and how we approach them, because the journey we've made in 20 years on our other soils we probably need to make in ideally 5 to 10 years on these. So it's quite a big task that we're looking at and working out, you know, where do we start to put the music together to play a tune with these soils, because I really feel like everything we've learnt on our other soils despite them being heavy, floody, brashy, don't really feel like they transfer 2 miles down the road.
The hope is that you can speed it up, can't you? But also
Yeah.
working in within the history of that farm has been challenged, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, there's been deep ploughs put through it and various other things over the years from what we can glean from neighbours and the information that we have. So, there's an element of sensitivity because people have obviously done what they thought was appropriate and right at the time, and they've done things for good reason. But in a climate that's more challenging, you know, our soils are everything.
So, Sarah, we've heard about your want for trees and your soil stresses or
Yeah.
concern. Why did you answer our advert of Be the Change?
I kind of said it in the Marion thing. Other people looking at your farm see different things to you. And this feels an enormous challenge. And to have some support around different people who I don't know, obviously Liz and I vaguely know each other, but up to the point of this project, I wouldn't say we've been people who are in regular contact with each other, but we always have a yarn if we see each other at a meeting. Um, and just to bring some new perspective, and yeah, I suppose I'm just a curious person, and I'm holistic, and I like your approach. And is carbon calling the place I would naturally have gone? I don't know, because I don't know where you would naturally start from. But I'm a great fan of when something comes across your radar and looks right, to go down the path and see if it is right, and if it's not, you can always back away, and if it is, great. And this actually very much does feel right, having gone through the process. So I'm really pleased we've engaged and we've done this.
That's good to hear. And what was your kind of not dream outcome? That sounds too airy fairy. What would you really like to get
Magic
out of
wand.
it?
You know you like my magic wand question.
Oh, there's Liz has got this really, really crap question, which she
Oh,
continues to
don't say
ask
that.
me. Go on, Liz. Go on.
So if you had a magic wand, what would you do?
Well, what would you want?
I'm with Nick. That's a rubbish question.
Yeah, because I can't quite remember. I think it's this idea of taking out all of the practical limitations, which is fairyland, I know. But anyway, yeah. Okay, Nick, you go then. Your question.
Can I
No,
have
but I
it?
would think when you look back at this, say you're 2 years down the
Yeah.
line, you think, "Oh, yeah, in 2025, I did this thing with these crazy women, uh, called Be the Change, and it gave me" what?
Well, it made me feel I'm not alone being a crazy woman because it's great being with you guys. So that's
Yeah.
really helpful. And if I come out of this with a master plan for the farm, some great new contacts, um, a bit of a master plan for succession for the next generation, and sort of go into that with a good understood approach that will keep both generations happy as we go through that process. Get some insight around how I deal with the eternal pleasure of both blackgrass and brome and how we move these soils forward 10 years. I would be absolutely delighted. Um, Now, I don't expect all of those things to happen or to be absolutely completed in 2 years' time. Um, but I do love a framework because it gets you halfway to a conversation and a decision being made. If everybody's coalesced around a framework in the early days, when an opportunity comes along, you can see where it fits into the framework. And in family farming businesses, you essentially farm by committee, let's face it. And if you've got an agreed strategy and framework, and then you've got a funding opportunity, that becomes a much easier conversation. And I'm all for preparing for today for the problem of tomorrow. So tomorrow's less painful than it could be.
So I suppose the few things we've got coming up. So family charter that Nick and I have previously spoken to Peter Craven about, and so that the plan for is to do one at yours in the spring.
Yeah.
And also through the soil assessment I did in October, we did some soil food web. So hopefully with Daniel Eden, is to maybe do some trials on inoculation in the spring as well. So that would be some interesting things. Maybe not solving a blackgrass brome, but looking at it from a different angle, isn't it? In terms of what does soil biology bring to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the family charter thing is a really good example of a question half answered already. that was a really easy one for us as a family, as in the context of this project, because we've been talking about this for 2 years. So through the work I've been doing in NFU in Leicestershire, Northampton, Rutland, we already had Peter Craven to speak because succession is one of those ongoing themes that we try and make sure members have access to interesting people around. Um, and I watched Peter's Nuffield really, really carefully. And I've sort of almost gone to start to write a family charter. And actually, it's really hard to do on your own, for yourself, for your family. And it sort of needs somebody who's a little bit from outside to come in and do that. So how we take that forward is something that I'm really interested about, because ultimately that potentially structures a family business for success in the long term. So, and I think from a business structure perspective, we're in the position whereby we've done our planning, we've restructured the business, we've done what we need to do to be set up to put the family charter in. So it feels like the timing's right on that, and it was a decision half made that will bring us to sort of from 50% to 75% done on that particular strand that already sat within our business's plan.
And I think, and on the master plan, so I'm still doing a bit of work with Marion, and then you've got quite close links with Anglia Water, as you say,
Yeah.
above that reservoir. There's potential for catchment sensitive farming to be amongst it. Woodland Trust, Forestry Commission. So it's bringing all of these different people in, isn't it, to give their ideas, and not saying that we're going to go with each one of theirs, but in terms of it's getting this greater range of concepts coming on to the farm. So that's what I think will be interesting, and sort of
Yeah.
demonstrating the power of that rather than it just sitting in isolation.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the great things that you guys have done is capacity. You know, when you're farming and you're doing projects and you're juggling the flotsam and jetsam of family life, the support that you guys have put around this in just organising stuff has just been hugely valuable. And you know, I didn't have to go and find a landscape architect and organise somebody coming onto the farm and then follow up and do the feedback, because that's been done. And I can't tell you how grateful I am for that, because it sometimes just that basic organisation piece and the chasing things down takes a lot of bandwidth, and that's been hugely helpful.
And I think, and the other thing that we've also talked about, and it links back to other stuff we've done previously, is the chirrup sort of idea, maybe again in the spring. Because I think what's interesting, so that's the bioacoustics looking at birds. So because of your three sites, it would be really interesting to do a comparison just within those three sites for you. So that's again
Yeah,
something we might think
and
about.
you will find massively different. I know you will find massively different levels of bird life, and different things coming out of that just from my own basic observation. You know, if you go down to Haringworth when it's flooded, you'll have 18 different waterfowl species sat there on floodwater, and you come up here some days and you think, "Is are there a lot of birds? Could there be more?"
Skylarks, I saw a lot of
Yeah,
skylarks.
no, there's a lot of skylarks, there's buzzards, there's kites. You know, there's a barn owl knocking about. Um, there's great tits and stuff like that, but there's n I don't feel like there's a lot of interesting bird life here, so I'd be really fascinated to see if Chirrup showed me that there is fascinating bird life here rather than what I think is here, which is robins, blackbirds, and wrens.
Which we all love to.
I
We just
do.
need to bring some more exciting friends with them. And also, I suppose, just on the NFU, and I suppose it's your involvement, but what's your current feeling for how are farmers ready for what you think the challenges might be in the next 5 to 10 years? From my experience, people are just there's a massive sense of overwhelm currently, so it's really difficult to chuck new stuff at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some and some. Uh, when people say to me, "What do farmers think?" I think, well, if you put 100 farmers in a room, you'd have 103 opinions. So I can't even tell you what farmers think. But I think some people are on it and are preparing and are looking to the future and looking for opportunity. And frankly, even those of us that are doing that are pretty overwhelmed some days. Wet Wednesday morning when it's been raining for 3 weeks, who isn't overwhelmed? You know, that is farming. Or on a dry day in July when you haven't seen any rain for 8 weeks, that's also pretty overwhelming. B- But all you can do is for farmers to start to see what other farmers are doing and see whether it's useful, whether it's helpful. I mean, some of this stuff that we're doing with trees and whatever, that's going to be 10 years probably until we know whether it's been useful or helpful. But I'm a great fan of starting small and failing fast. And I'll take a risk and I'll fail. And if it fails, fine. If it succeeds, you can then grow it and you can then develop it. So I'd always rather push a button and try something than wish I'd done it 10 years ago.
Yeah. And then we've got an event at your place we've got a date, Liz.
18th of June. It's actually at her local vineyard, which is one of the reasons why we selected her.
Yeah,
Penny.
my lovely friend Emma has an amazing wine pressing barn, so she's gonna host us. Yeah,
Oh,
it'll be really interesting. People come and have a look. I'll be honest. We'll tell you where we've got to. We'll tell you what's worked, what hasn't. I'm not sure how much stuff we'll have got through the system by June. Um,
and Nick and I had a bit of a chat about that yesterday because oh no, last week, and this idea that we've put loads of pressure on ourselves to deliver everything by June, and June is an opportunity for people just to hear about what we're up to.
yeah,
June, so this stuff will continue past that point. And so we realized there was this like, oh my God, we're running out of time. It's like actually we've just put the pressure doesn't exist because actually the event is just going to be a great day listening to all of these people and what we found out so far.
and I think for me, the thing that is fascinating about that is if we've got a load of farmers here having a look, going, "Well, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? Why didn't you do this? Well, if you stand here and look there, why haven't you done X over there?" And that's the interesting bit, is when you get a group of people really looking at something, not making too many judgments and just knocking an idea about, and life gets interesting at that point, doesn't it? It's something that we're good at in a in a really boring KE type way in the industry, but I'm not sure that we're as good at it around the strategic big conversations as we could be. And in a world where government flails about looking like it's hasn't decided if it's cutting its toenails or trying to make a difference, it's a bit of a I think there's a yawning space for us as farmers to really try and take control of our own destiny and work together more closely and work out what works and how we're going to deliver something that's bigger than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, and I think and the key in all of this was never to just chuck money at the problem. Do you mean this was about support and getting people in? It
Yeah.
wasn't about buying a fancy new piece of kit and going, right, that's the silver bullet. And so I think that's why it was designed as a way that it is accessible to lots of people. You might have to know the people, but we can do that. Do you mean we can publicize and talk about the range of people that you can get onto farms? But it's taking that step, isn't it, away from just talking to the same people all the time.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I'm sort of conscious of is because I've just had a bit of a moment of change in my life. There are things around the inoculation of soil stuff that I ideally would have liked to have got legs under this side of Christmas, because I've got things to plant that I would have piloted a bit of soil inoculation with over Christmas, but I need to get those plants in the ground. So that's not going to work in reality. And I sort of look at that, oh, you should have done better on that, Sarah. But the reality of it is if it comes after Christmas and it's a benefit after Christmas and it's a benefit for next winter when I come to plant some trees, okay, I've missed my what I'd like to call my golden opportunity to start small and fail fast by chucking some inoculation around some shrubs that I need to plant to create some shelter. But the opportunity still exists, and sometimes you just have to try and not hold yourself to perfection, don't you? And just
And
accept
and
that you're pootling along.
and I think some of that is because the soil food web, do you mean on your place was showing that there was quite high bacteria dominance in some farms and on the fields, and we need to do a bit more further investigation. But there was some really good balanced bacteria, fungi, protozoa in hedges. So
Yeah,
it could be that it might not be the fancy stuff or semi-fancy stuff from Daniel, but it could be that it's soil taken from your hedges or the wood that you can
yeah,
start to use as some sort of as a root dip or as a starter point.
yeah, yeah,
We know it's
absolutely.
there on the farm. We now need it to be in the banks that you've newly established.
And I mean, I think we've historically done some work around soils that have said some of our soils are quite fungal and some of our arable soils are quite fungal. And I'm really keen to just dig into the microscopy aspect of what's been done on that soil food web work and understand what the person looking down that microscope was looking at. Because I I've got all sorts of questions in my mind of how can a soil not have fungi in it? They were returning zeros. That doesn't make sense to me. So where I've been told my soils are fungal, I want to be able to look down a microscope myself and think, oh yeah, that fits. Do we need to dig a bit further, look a bit harder? It's just a slightly different approach, really. So I've got a lot of questions still outstanding on that I really want to dig into much more deeply, but I need a bit more headspace to do that.
I think, and also we have to acknowledge that it was a sample taken around an area in the field, and in that microscopy work, they take a sample of a sample,
Yeah,
and they are looking during the protocol is certain fields of view, and if there is hyphae, and there's a couple of comments, and I can't remember if it's your fields or not, but there was a couple of comments where hyphae was seen outside the field of view, but they can't in their protocol. That doesn't count towards the total.
that's interesting.
So, so I think we'll follow that up in
Yeah,
January in terms of getting microscopes and seeing what go and relatively simple techniques just to see if anything, if it's there, how things are changing. But certainly what was interesting, which is in the middle of the field, numbers are low. At the hedge, 50 meters away, they're not. So it's and that some of that is a grass field. So it's not necessarily about disturbance, is it? Is it about feed source? What is it that's going on that's just not working as well as we would like in the middle of the field?
yeah, and I mean we've identified in that field that there's something in the top layer whereby we've essentially got black organic matter that's not cycling and not doing anything, and how we unlock that is also really interesting. Is it inoculation? Is it nutrition? Is it acidity? How we start to pull that problem apart is really interesting as well.
Oh yeah, lots. Was and I had a feeling the other day of this sort of like it just every time you think you've answered a question, five other things pop up. But I think that's what we like about it. It
Yeah.
just I don't think we can put it back in the box anymore. Won't
And
fit.
the other thing that I come back to, and this is a little bit broader around all sorts of medical and farming things, is sometimes you can go quite a long way to trying to bottom out a problem. And you can solve it in the trying to bottom it out, but never really know what the problem was in the first place. And sometimes you just have to accept that. When you've got a mind that doesn't want to, it's really hard to bring yourself to a point of, right, the problem is solved. We're going no further. We're just going to crack on.
And that's why you need to believe in pixies. So sometimes it's just the pixies that do it.
If you could send me some pixies just to do Christmas, that'd be smashing.
I've celebrated the winter solstice. It's fine. I've gone a bit alternative still.
You
Anyway,
could have your own sandals for Christmas, Liz.
yes, obviously. But no, thank you, Sarah. That's been brilliant. It's just, yeah, I think it was just a flavour of all of this. There's just a lot going on, but in a great way. And there'll be lots to talk about in June, but that isn't at the end. It will continue
Yeah,
post
no,
after that.
brilliant.
Any final questions, Nick?
No, I think that's excellent. I'm keen to, well, I'm hoping to get to Sarah's before June, but no, I think it's really good. I want to see her view. Want to see if it's windy as here.
It won't be as windy as it is at your place.
It is quite it is windy though.
It's windy here today.
I'm not sure how I'm going to get trees to grow in this wind, but we'll see.
Oh no, they will. They'll just kind of be slightly
On the wonk.
on the wonk.
Yeah, I was going to see my cherry tree in my garden. It grows sideways.
Yeah.
But perfect. Thank you very much.
Lovely.
We would like to thank Esmée Fairbairn Foundation for their contribution towards the Be the Change project. Founded in 1961, Esmée Fairbairn Foundation is one of the UK's largest independent funders. In 2024, they provided 48.8 million in funding towards a wide range of work in support of their aims to improve our natural world, secure a fairer future and nurture creative, confident communities.